Hey guys, Katface Killa here. It's been a little while, sorry about that. I actually put out a recording towards the beginning of the month where I actually did not review what I was talking about. I was doing something you'll see in a couple weeks. It's an experiment. Actually, this is an experiment too, because John had asked me to do a review of one of the titles I had spoken about on that recording. He wanted me to do a straight up review of it because nobody's really talking about it. The title called Freesia. So even with that, I mean, if it was just a straight up review, I probably would have put it out in like 2 or 3 days. So at this point, it's not that hard for us to do that. But with this year, I want to try a different approach going through my list. It's very big. I keep shrinking it down, but I never get it done because just life happens. And doing it one title at a time just never seems to actually clear the list. So I'm going to talk about Freesia and Homunculus. This is going to be more of like a review and a comparison of the two because they have a similar theme of self-discovery. And I don't know, personally speaking, self-discovery of the protagonist is not that unique of a theme for a story, especially with anime or manga. But in these two particular titles, I think it's done differently enough to make it worth investigating. If you're more into the kind of stuff that I like, which, you know, at this point our core group kind of knows whether or not they like what I like. So let's get to it. Common with the stuff that I actually like tends to be a hard sell. I'm just gonna come out and say right now, both of these, in my mind, by our reviewing system, acquired tastes. They're also both not for kids. Another common theme with me. I'm just gonna do a real brief overview without any spoilers before I actually get into it a bit more for the people who care about spoilers. So let's look at Freesia. Freesia is a really interesting story to me in the sense of its setting. Freesia takes place in an alternate history Japan where it's not explained with who, but Japan is at war with somebody. That's kind of a peripheral thing until towards the end of the story, but the protagonist is a very confused individual. He's clearly mentally ill. He hears like ringing. He talks to people who are not there, sometimes whom he knows are dead, but it helps him get his bearings straight in reality. The premise of Freesia is that within this culture that is in this alternate history Japan, they have legally allowed retaliatory killings, meaning like if somebody wrongly harmed or killed somebody who you have legitimate right to be upset about, like a direct family member or a spouse, for example, you can legally go through different agencies and set up basically like a death match with the offender. So the protagonist, Hiroshi Kano, he's like a hitman, but a public service hitman. You know what I mean? Like it's legal. It's not actually illegal. And the story is really just about him trying to navigate his perception of reality while doing his job where he kills people. And that's just kind of it. I mean, in my opinion, it's not an especially long series. It's 12 volumes. That's kind of like an average sort of series length to me. So that's nothing special. The artwork probably is what makes it a hard sell though, because the artwork is like really sketchy looking. I think that's like intentional because the protagonist has such trouble with perceiving reality correctly that the artist wanted to make it so that you kind of get that as well. But that's just like a personal thing. I don't actually know that definitely, but even though it's supposed to be kind of a turnoff, it made it like interesting to me to read because a lot of anime and manga now is like they want to be pretty, they want to be pretty, they want to be super fucking pretty. It's more important than the substance of the story or it being more interesting or the concept of the setting or anything. It's we want it to look pretty. We want it to look pretty. Because of that, I mean, even though it's supposed to be kind of a turnoff to me, it actually drew me in and got me to start reading it a little bit beyond the first few chapters. So, I mean, not an overly complicated story here. One of the things about this story is this individual in particular, Kano, has the ability, I don't even know if it's psychically or what, but he can like camouflage himself from people from who he wants. So that obviously serves him very well in his job. And understand, this isn't him like turning invisible to security cameras and stuff. It's just to people that he wants to turn invisible to. And that's not really ever explained that well or anything. It's just something he can do, and it seems to be like linked to his mental illness. But that's actually kind of the entirety of the story. I mean, he has two co-workers that work with him while they're trying to do this deathmatch sort of thing because they work as a three-man team. And that's really kind of it. Outside of that, you have the guy they're trying to kill, or girl, and their bodyguard, who is usually like a public servant as well. But that's kind of the whole of the story. But for me, I mean, even if it was that simple, it was interesting enough. So that's Fresia. It's a title that I put off talking about because I didn't really know how to talk about it until I had the idea to compare it with another title. The other title I'm going to talk about is Homunculus. Homunculus is better known because the artist did Ichi the Killer, and he's done some other stuff as well, but you can tell if you've read Ichi the Killer by the artwork immediately when you pick it up that it's the same guy. If you're familiar with Ichi the Killer, I mean, which is very gratuitous with sexual violence and physical violence and murder, honestly, and crime, and just all this disgusting stuff that kind of gets swept under the rug in Japanese culture, which I'm sure is exaggerated in the story quite a bit, but nonetheless, you know, it's a taboo subject mostly. When you talk about anime and manga, usually this topic or this theme is like cartoony, but when it came to Ichi the Killer, this was more serious stuff, okay? So, Homunculus is a little bit more of an elaborate setup and story and journey. I mean, Fresia is very simple. You're just following this guy as he's trying to get himself grounded in reality, and he has a death match consistently throughout the story. Whereas in Homunculus, you have a character going down the path of self-discovery, but you don't have the killing and all that. I don't want to say cheap, but easy filler to go with it. Homunculus is a very psychological and text-driven story, so if you don't like your guys talking a lot, you're not going to like Homunculus. Homunculus is 15 volumes long. It's a little bit longer than Fresia, but the best way to put it is, I think in one or two of the volumes, the protagonist is literally talking to like one person for the entire volume, and that's the story of that book. It's mostly a conversation between two people. So if this sort of idea kind of turns you off, even with all the interesting visuals and everything that go with Homunculus and the unique kind of semi-real, semi-cartoony, fugly characters that the artist is known for doing, you're going to get turned off. Then that's what makes this an acquired taste. It's a harder sell. I can't just hand this to anybody and be like, this is interesting. It's a lot of talking, and that's kind of it. However, it's visually and mentally stimulating. It's bizarre. The journey of the character himself basically, I think, goes over the course of like a week over the story, the 15 volumes up until the very end where there's a time skip. All this is happening in a very short time frame, whereas in Fresia, I'm sure it's over the course of a few months or maybe even half a year or something. But to me, it was an interesting journey nonetheless. Anyways, an interesting story as well. So the thing that makes Homunculus very interesting is that it revolves around the concept of trepanation, where you open up a hole in your skull, and this is supposed to change like the blood flow and the pressure on your brain and all this other weird shit that gives you like extrasensory perception, whether it's telepathy or seeing things or anything that kind of falls into that sort of realm that we label as occult, but we're constantly trying to prove with science, or like in a lot of movies and TV shows or whatever. And even anime and manga, everybody tries to mix occult with science when it comes to that stuff. So that's what this story is. The protagonist, Nakoshi, is a seemingly recent homeless guy who kind of hasn't accepted his role and fully given himself into being homeless. He lives in his car at the park where all the other homeless guys are, in front of a very ritzy sort of hotel, where it turns out he used to be a regular at. So he's like in that in-between process. So the guy running the experiment chooses him specifically because he hasn't really settled into the homeless life yet. He doesn't have a place where he belongs. They get going to it, obviously he eventually agrees to do this. And from that point on, he starts perceiving random different people with very strange things. Like, for example, like one of the very first guys, if not the first guy, I think that Nakoshi interacts with after being able to see things is a big buff Yakuza guy, but the way he perceives him is like a young farm boy wearing inside of like a robotic suit of armor. So that doesn't catch your attention, and by the end of that interaction you don't give a shit, then you're not going to give a shit for the rest of the story, which again is partially what makes it an acquired taste. So you're just dropping by to see what kind of weird shit I had to recommend. Fresia, this legal deathmatch sort of series where the main character is clearly crazy, and Homunculus, a homeless guy that does a medical experiment and starts seeing shit, and it's mostly conversational driven, very psychological, whereas the other one is more kind of, actually I don't even really know how to describe Fresia that well. That's probably why I put it off so long, but I mean, it has action, it has adult stuff going on in it. and it was an interesting journey to follow a mentally ill character as the protagonist. So now I'm going to get into spoilers and kind of break it down a bit more, specifically the journeys of self-discovery with these two titles. That's why I chose both of them to put them together. First of all, Homunculus. We'll go with Homunculus because the journey of self-discovery is the driving narrative to it. Homunculus, it's very early on suggested by the guy running the experiment that the different hallucinations, quote-unquote hallucinations, that Nakoshi sees on random people are actually linked to him. He sees parts of himself in those people, subconsciously. Interacting with them can help him discover himself. It's shown, I think, kind of early on, maybe towards the middle of the story, that Nakoshi kind of lost sight of who he was, like his identity. He had plastic surgery, he burned all the pictures that had his face in it, he doesn't remember his smell, his taste. Because he doesn't know who he was anymore, he doesn't know who to be, and he like self-destructs and, fucks up his job, resigns, and becomes homeless. So from that point on, you are not just seeing him trying to help these people and discover why they look so weird with the hallucination, but how he can learn about himself and feel more, because he's a very empathic character. From the very beginning, it shows he has the ability to tell what's wrong with his car that he's living in just through his senses, his sight, sound, feeling the vibrations, the smell, all that stuff. He's able to tell what's wrong with his car, and that kind of carries on to his extrasensory perception. I don't know, I mean, personally speaking, it's weird. It is really fucking weird. The end gets very odd too, just like with Ichi the Killer. I mean, the guy has no reservations about going bizarre, and this is a really bizarre story. So I mean, if you want something that's out there that has to do with self-discovery, this was pretty interesting. It's very odd looking visually, very striking, but the only thing is, like I said, extremely text heavy story. If you don't want to deal with your story being people talking the entire time, this is not going to be for you. I want to reiterate that. If you want to see some action, you want to see some people getting, fucked up, you want to see killing, whatever, you want some action to go with your narrative, your dialogue, your chattiness, Fresia is probably more for you. So speaking of Fresia, more than just the journey of self-discovery for the protagonist, you have an exploration sort of what the world would be like if you could legally get revenge on people who wronged you, at least in certain ways. We have mostly Hiroshi Kano trying to be able to ground himself better in reality, but over the course of the story, he works for an agency, so you kind of see like the legalities of what that business would be like. Its ups and downs, and if they fuck up, what sort of things would happen. It's a what if story, what if you could legally get revenge for people who did certain things to you and your family or your loved ones. That's kind of more what makes it interesting than Hiroshi Kano's sort of self-discovery. I mean, it's not that deep. There isn't that big of a mystery behind him. He does have some kind of special powers, but in terms of the story and discovering like why he has it or anything like that, not that important. Really not that important. It's more like, what if you could kill people legally for revenge? And that's kind of the story. So I think that's all I'm going to say. I mean, this was kind of an experiment. I want to start doing 2 or more titles each recording from now on than just one, because I don't have time to always just do one anymore. I never get the list done that way. So hopefully I was of some kind of service to you. I brought up some interesting titles to you to either check out or to avoid. That's it. I'll try to be putting out stuff more frequently than this. Like I said, I had another recording where I actually didn't even review the titles, but Don wanted me to review one of them, so this was the impromptu review. Check us out on Facebook. Search up Planet Tyro. Join us. Get in on the discussions and, all of our other good crap. We're on YouTube. That has all of our archived stuff. I think we're on like SHOUTENGINE and some other stuff. Don can tell you sometime about it. The best way to contact me is on Twitter @the_oldboy, and we'll see you around.